Welcome, everyone. So today we're here to speak with a great panel of folks on how to succeed at customer success, when to invest, specialize, and scale. There's going to be plenty of time for Q&A. Our format here is really some seated questions, conversation among the panelists, and if at any point you want to join in, please feel free to put any questions right at the bottom left side of your screen in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as possible over the course of our conversation. At the end of the session, we're going to send out the deck and also the recording, so please keep an eye out for that email. And with that, I'm going to dig in. So my name is Liz Kane. I'm the VP of Go-to-Market here at OpenView. We're a venture capital firm that specializes in expansion stage software companies. And one of our key initiatives is really around customer success right now. We're hearing a lot of questions from our portfolio and prospect companies on best practices, and we thought it would be a great way to address that through a panel of experts. And so with us here today, we have Arjun Devgan, Dave Blake, and Stephanie Berner. What I'm really excited about is the diverse backgrounds of the panelists. So we have people coming through professional services, sales, account management, representing companies like NetSuite, Percolate, Omniture, Adobe, Box. So it should be a really great discussion. And what I'd like to do is actually allow the panelists to just each introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their current team to lay the groundwork. So if it's okay, Arjun, let's start with you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Liz, for the intro. My name is Arjun Devgan. I'm VP of Global Services and Customer Success at Percolate. We're an enterprise software company in the marketing space. I've worked exclusively for enterprise SaaS companies for the last 17 years across financials, ERP, CRM, e-commerce, analytics, and most recently marketing. If you look at my current role right now, I run the post-sales team here at Percolate, so that incorporates a professional services team, a customer success team, support, education services, and a technical services team that handles more technical integrations type work with our customers.
Awesome. And I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Dave Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of Client Success. So we provide actually a platform for customer success teams to help manage, retain, and grow their existing customer base. Before founding Client Success, I led global account management and customer success teams at companies, one that was Omniture, that was acquired after going public by Adobe, and so had a team of 120 customer success and account management leaders around the world, managing a $420 million book of business, and took my frustrations and challenges of that to build a solution that I wish I would have had, which is our company, Client Success. So it's a pleasure to be here and put on my practitioner hat and share some insights from my own experience.
No, that's great. And I'm sure you can share the perspective of a number of companies as well, given that you're actually in this space and working with customer success teams each and every day.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Awesome. And then Stephanie, if I can turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Stephanie Berner, and I lead the customer success management and customer advisory teams at Box. My background is actually even different from my peers here, where I started my career in account management in various forms and made the transition to SaaS about 8 years ago, then had an opportunity to build out and lead transformation of various forms of customer success teams at two really high-growth companies, Opower and Medallia. And most recently have been at Box leading the customer success management team, where we are responsible for the care and feeding of our 70,000 plus paying customers. Also lead a strategy and operations team that supports that customer base. And it's been really, really fascinating to see very different flavors of customer success as this functional area has grown and evolved over the years. So I am excited to be here and be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think with that, the first question that I have to put out here is really, what does customer success mean? And I will kind of start off by saying we meet with thousands of startups every year. I personally speak to hundreds of CEOs and departmental leaders. And what I'm finding is customer success is just this really amorphous thing. Sometimes it encompasses services, implementation. Sometimes it covers renewals, upsell into the install base, more traditional account management or sales activities. So, maybe Stephanie, let's start with you. I'd love to hear really what customer success has meant to you in the last few roles and how you think about really defining this really integral function.
Well, I think honestly that's what makes this new discipline so fascinating, is that it's not perfectly defined, and we get to define it as we go, and sometimes that makes it extra hard, but that's what keeps it exciting. So to me, customer success is about creating happy, healthy customers. And if you put that sort of philosophy and that North Star against the changing business models where the sort of burden of proof of any application or any service that a customer buys, that burden of proof has shifted onto the vendor and away from the buyer. And because of that, it's really on us as the vendor, so to speak, to really ensure that the customer is getting the value of what they purchased. And that's really where the magic happens, and that's why customer success, I think, has really taken off in the last couple of decades, where, especially in a subscription business, which is like the new thing in software and even beyond software, it's the responsibility of the company to make sure that our customers are really getting the value out of their investment. So to me, customer success is about, making sure that our customers are getting what they thought they were going to get. They're getting and more. It's really about ensuring that we are actually solving their business problems, and they're seeing the value of that investment. The other thing I think that is kind of unique to this space is we are, at our most basic forms, we're in many ways the keeper of the revenue. In a subscription model, it's all about recurring revenue. And everything that we do in customer success, we often are measured in terms of adoption or qualified leads or customer advocacy activities or resolution on ticket time, et cetera. But all of those things ladder up to a customer renewing and growing with us. And I think that's the case, I think, in any success team. And so, our North Star really has to be, we are leading to that, not only retention, but of course growth. And everything that we do, all of our activities, because so much of what our big teams do is very activities driven, it's really about that North Star outcome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, that makes complete sense. I really like that idea of a North Star, of really kind of aligning around this one goal. Arjun, I know you and I have had some conversations about this in the past, but thinking about specialization within the team, as you think about sort of how Stephanie just described that North Star, how do you think about the different players that are involved, especially in an enterprise sale like you work on now, across those different touch points with the customer, and how you segment your own team to kind of best accomplish the tasks you need to with a customer, but also keep their overall satisfaction in mind?
Yeah, I think first of all, just to echo Stephanie's point, it's important not to get too hung up on thinking about customer success as a function, but more of an idea that if you align all aspects of your organization, notably the teams that are working directly with the customers, but also the broader organization around kind of driving customer business outcomes, then you can sort of fuel your growth based on that. And so, if you look at Percolate, where we are today, our teams are very diverse. We have fee-based professional services teams. We have, both fee-based and sort of, free training that we offer our customers. And then we have a sort of customer success management function and other teams outside of that. And, I can't I can't make a specific recommendation to anyone on the phone today because one size doesn't fit all. But I think keeping in mind that when you start to build out a customer success management function or a post-sales team, it's important to look at certain factors, such as complexity of your product, the category you're in, the and size of sort of the customer that you're working with, their appetite to pay for services, and even the skills that are required on your team to support the customer and make them successful. Those are sort of the factors you have to consider when you start to build out your team. I know we have a lot of early stage companies on the phone right now. Certainly you are very likely to start off with a one-stop shop sort of CSM. as the initial role, but I think as you start to build out your organization, it's really important to understand all of those factors and think through those factors when you start to think about specializing roles, because certainly the one-stop stop CSM is a popular choice early in your sort of growth cycle of the company, but it's very hard to transition away from, and generally speaking, it is something that doesn't scale over time.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear perspectives of others on this. Dave or Stephanie, as you think about sort of that scaling and diversification of the people you're hiring, how do you guys think about starting to segment out the various touch points with a customer or the skill sets you need in order to do them?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in. This is Dave. I think, as Arjun said, it just depends on the evolution of you as a company and a team, but usually what you see is that that specialization breaks out when you need to scale. But the key considerations that you should think about when you're looking at specialization is how do you specialize and do it in a way that aligns with the customer's needs, not your organization's? Because I think a lot of people scale because of pain points internally, but what it does is it results in pain points that the customers continue to experience. And so the best way to do that is go through a journey mapping exercise, put on the lens of the customer, and maybe even engage customers, and really try to design your scaling model and your specialization to enhance the customer experience, not just improve your ability to scale and your organization.
Yeah, if I could jump in, this is Stephanie. I just want to echo, I think my colleagues here totally nailed it, but I want to echo three things. One is that it totally depends on your business environment. I think one thing as I was thinking about preparing for this discussion is oftentimes, especially early companies who've never done this before, are looking for that framework. What is the one framework or rule of thumb on all of this? And the reality is that there isn't one size that fits all. It depends on your go-to-market strategy. It depends on your product. It depends on your implementation. It depends on how even your sales motion. How consultative do you need to be with your product, et cetera. And there's so many of these factors that you have to deeply kind of spend the time to understand and then develop a model around that. The second thing is that what I have seen around specialization is that you kind of have some intuition around maybe we should start to specialize because your teams start to break, your processes break, your people start to get really stressed and make mistakes. Maybe you start to see attrition, either of your people or your customers. And you start to notice maybe we need to have an offering. And the reality of that is what I've seen so many companies do is they noodle on that open question for way too long and they delay making a decision. And what's inevitable is that you're going to have to specialize at some point. That complexity will not go away. In fact, it will only get kind of bigger and meatier over time. And so when you start to see signals in your business that maybe this specialization should happen, from my perspective, the best thing you can do is just take action. And you may not get it right out of the gate, but it is super important to take that first step. And then the third thing, to kind of echo the final point around customer experience, I think this is one of the most interesting trends that I've seen in the last probably year or two around CS, I'll call it strategy, those of us who like to sort of nerd out on these topics, is the idea of really aligning around your customer's experience and your customer journey first. I love what was said around, so often we solve for the pain points internally, and that only sets us up for more pain points externally over time.
So that's great. Actually, sort of building on that journey mapping concept, I think one of the things I get asked very regularly is when does that handoff happen between sales and customer success? And really, how early does your customer success team get involved and in what capacity of that, whether it's buyer's journey or customer journey? I'd love to get your perspective on that, and maybe Arjun, if you would start here and talk to us a bit about how you think about pre-sales activity versus post, and when customer success really engages.
Yes, I think it's extremely important to make sure your sales team is actually part of the customer success effort and is aligned on delivering value to the customer. And the best thing you can do there is have a rigorous process where the customer success teams are involved pre-sales, and you are agreeing to things like what was the business pain, why did they purchase the solution, how are we expecting to deliver value, and what would be the measurable way to report back on that value. Because that's kind of the slam dunk way to deliver renewal, is to be able to document some of those things early on and then sort of fulfill them, because this customer success team's job is to actually realize that vision that was promised either on paper or through a conversation early on. And I know that's very hard to do. That's easier said than done as you're maturing your sales team. I think we're still growing up and doing that, even though we have a fairly large sales team. But it's never too late to start. All right, you could be a large company that doesn't have that DNA and mentality, and you can always start to sort of engage that. And I don't think it's a good idea for sales teams to throw the contract over the fence to the customer success team or the services team. That's not how you unify and around sort of the customer's mission and goals. You have to work hand in hand pre-sales and post-sales.
I mean, that makes complete sense to me. I guess I would turn that over to you, Dave, and ask also in your experience, as you think about sort of that life cycle of the customer and really I guess handoff may be the wrong word, but the knowledge transfer, whether it's between sales and a post-sales effort, or even with turnover within a team. How do you guys think about addressing that, maybe within your solution or previously running these types of teams?
Yeah, I think Arjun said it really well. The way that we look at it is that we've talked a lot about today about aligning around customers' objectives or outcomes or values. The challenge is, and the thing to remember is that every customer's definition of value is different. And so the way that we look at it is that right from the very beginning, marketing has a responsibility to, as leads come in, to gather information about the customer that we're going to build upon throughout the sales process, and then continue to enhance post-sales. And so our goal through that entire process is to do a lot of discovery about their needs, their definition of value, and the outcomes they're looking for, and be able to continue to share that information with the other team members, so that it's this seamless ongoing discovery and united effort to help our customers achieve those objectives. One of the things that the way we look at it is it kind of is a handoff of a baton, or even just sliding over into the passenger seat while another team member takes the driver's control for that point. But everybody is just reiterating or enhancing or restating what the customer's goals are, so that we're all united to achieve those goals.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in there. I think the key there is writing it down. You can't do this whole process verbally, right? It needs to be in your CRM or your customer success management system. It could be in a document uploaded to Box, but it needs to be documented through the sales process and through the early stages of the customer onboarding and sort of validated with the customer. So that's one best practice, definitely. Yeah, so when the CSM, agreed, Arjun, so when the CSM is engaged, the CSM gives the impression we know you already. Right. We know you very well. We understand your objectives. My role now is my turn to help and engage, and I'm going to go and do X, Y, and Z to help you achieve your goals. That's the goal there, is to know them really well and make sure the entire organization knows them and helps them achieve those.
And as you get into those activities, and Stephanie, you mentioned this earlier as well, so you've mapped out what you want to accomplish, you've defined the value you're going to provide to a customer. As you start to think about the actual process by which you manage customers at scale, how much of that is a defined process or defined set of activities that happens with every account versus how much leeway do you give your team to figure out what should the frequency of touch points be? How many people within the account should I really be getting to know? How do you think about the structure for that? Maybe Stephanie, I'll point that at you first.
Yeah, sure. So it's a super complicated question because the way I think about prescriptive workflows has a lot to do with who you hire and how you think about different customer segments. So at Box, we've got north of 75,000 paying customers, but only 3,000 of those actually have a CSM assigned. And we have different tiers. We haven't talked much about or at all about segmentation on today's call, but one of the really important steps you need to take in a scaling CS team is start to think about your customer segments. And so the sort of prescriptive customer journey or prescriptive outreach really becomes critically important in sort of the at-scale portion of our business, sort of I'll call it it's not the lowest value segment, but it's certainly our smallest customers. That is almost entirely prescriptive. And it wasn't that way in the beginning. We learned a lot about what those customers needed many, many years ago, and we're able to scale that out over time. And then if you take it all the way to the top of the customer base, with our highest touch enterprise customers who are spending millions of dollars with us, that's where I'm actually less prescriptive. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is while we want to provide our CSMs with a toolkit that takes most of the guesswork out of their day and also helps them grow as professionals and feel like they have some control over kind of what they do with their customers, there's an element of creativity that makes this job interesting. And I think this is one thing that I've talked to a lot of my CS colleagues about over the last couple of years is that on the one hand, sometimes the CSM just wants you to say, do these 10 things with every customer and you'll be successful. But on the other hand, when you give somebody a black and white checklist, the job is just kind of rote and it's not interesting. And I think it's that level of creativity that comes through when we hire really awesome talent and you kind of put them against sort of somewhat ambiguous situations. And it's amazing what you can see out of people in the way that they choose to engage with their customers. And so I'm really a believer in finding a balance in those higher touch segments between, kind of giving people a toolkit that they can be selective with, but also, not being so prescriptive that it sort of sucks the creativity and the fun out of the job. But I will say, as you think about scale, early in a company's life cycle, I think it was Arjun who said, everybody's a generalist. And there's not a whole lot of systems and processes, and sometimes they kind of grow organically over time. And that's great because it's the people who know everything about the customer's journey who are going to kind of probably have the strongest perspective on what those customers need. But over time, that concept of like taking the guesswork out of the day does become more and more important because it helps you scale and it helps your teams kind of keep the right balance of where they're spending their time. So that's helpful.
No, it's very helpful. And I guess if I could build on that a little bit, I think as we're thinking about activities and the ways in which you approach an account and the creativity it takes to kind of get deep and understand one, I think the second piece of that is really like what the ratios are and what it takes to be able to either follow these really prescriptive processes on the low end or at your largest enterprise customers, give someone the creativity to go dig in. I'd love to understand what you think of as a rule of thumb for managing accounts. Is it the amount of revenue someone manages or oversees? Is it the number of stakeholders? Is it based on the processes they need to follow? How do you think about how many accounts one person can really take on well?
Yeah, I can maybe I'll that.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm sure we all have lots of thoughts on this one.
Arjun, go ahead.
I think the industry average is kind of based on book size, right? So it's like $2.5 to $5 million. I've been through a couple of different iterations of this. We had a lot of I would say like low dollar value customers, and we had 60, 70 accounts assigned per CSM. We've kind of migrated our business away from that, and now we have very sort of high touch ratios because our dollar values are very large six-figure deals. Even then you have to segment. But I think some of the things that I think folks should think about when they're doing this is it's whatever your ratio is, the number one reason why the ratios don't work out over the long term is CSMs end up doing things they shouldn't be doing or perhaps could have been divested from them early on. So I have a pretty strong opinion on a couple of things. One, I think, one-stop shop is fine, but too many people, when they're very early in scaling their business, will combine support and customer success, which is not a good idea in my opinion. I think that is the one thing which you can easily separate out because one is naturally an inbound function of receiving customer complaints or customer bugs or questions and resolving them. And the other is a role that requires outbound outreach and sort of, in many cases, a prescriptive approach to reaching out to customers. And you want discretion on when you need to be able to reach out to a customer. You want to be able to spend more time with the unhealthy account than someone who's chugging along just fine. So early as possible, separating out support or never actually unifying those two functions from day one is really important because you will end up with a very sort of heavily burdened customer success management function if they're also doing glorified white glove support, right? And the related part is if you can invest early in automating anything that can be automated, delivery of a new feature notification, a webinar invite, maybe even some sort of NPS, automated NPS follow-up for the masses because, we have hundreds, sometimes thousands of users. The CSMs couldn't possibly follow up with every single one of them. So I think those two things can really help with account ratios. But back to your original question, I think it's usually in sort of the $2.5 to $5 million ARR. I do think most companies do it by ARR and not by account numbers. And I do think people, as they scale, start to segment because you can't just apply a one-size-fits-all as you start to get hundreds and thousands of customers.
Yeah,
Dave, could you jump in there too? I'll let you.
Yeah, just a few other considerations. I agree. ARR is the typical, the deciding factor. There is a number of customer component in there in that I believe that once a CSM gets about 50 customers, it's really hard to provide any kind of personalized, proactive customer success. And so about 50 and above, the relationship starts to degrade to where it really comes a glorified tech support role. And so that's kind of where the threshold is for me, about 50 to 100, where you start to look at breaking them up or you're using automation. And then the third component is complexity of the product that you're supporting, or that you're delivering, or the complexity of the relationship. If it's a more complex product or a more complex relationship, then the ratios may be lower. So those are a couple other considerations. And then just to echo Stephanie and Arjun that the key part of this is when you get to a point of segmenting, to have a very strategic plan for each segment on how you're going to meet their needs. And some of it, you can do a lower touch strategy that meets their needs heavily versus a higher touch strategy for your strategic accounts, but they really need to be broken out and defined very clearly by segment.
So it's interesting that I've heard that word segment come up a few times, and I also hear that come up on the direct sales side. Do you guys find that it's important to have a segment that's consistent across your entire customer base regardless of the team that's interacting, or do you find you're defining segments within your own sort of customer success organization based on who's going to manage what account?
So I'll jump in here and just share how we do it at Box. And I do think this is another one where at a very early stage company, when you're really going for product market fit and you really just want to keep every single customer as happy as you can, it's a very different exercise than when you get to be many years old and you've kind of figured things out in terms of both your sales motion and your long-term customer success motion. But we at Box are aligned to sales segment, and it's done a couple of things for us. One is, as we have 50 CSMs covering all segments plus, a couple hundred salespeople, we have found that, a really important recipe for success is to ensure that we are aligning CSMs to a small number of AEs, account executives, that allows those CSMs to get really aligned on the long-term account strategy and kind of develop a cohesive plan. I would say that one of the reasons that that's important here is because, and this is another factor that I'll share in addition to what Dave said about the types of things you want to keep in mind as you're thinking about ratios and such, is that your growth model matters here quite a bit. So at Box, we are kind of a land and expand model where we'll typically sell a pilot or a line of business, and the idea is let's grow to the enterprise over time, versus a product that is only sold to one part of the business like marketing or HR or even IT, where there's only a handful of users. Where you go in once with one big sale and you got to keep that sale over time, and the long-term growth is really more about SKU ads. So at Box, it's really about we want to grow big over time, and so the alignment with the sales team becomes super important, and it's kind of always been that way. So alignment to sales segment has been really important.
We do it the other way. Our sales team has their segments are very different from our segments because we found that we needed more segments. The sales team has primarily 3 segments they sell into. We needed to diversify beyond that in our kind of service model, and we do extend our post-sale segments to not just the customer success management staffing function, but also how we provide customer support, how we give access to education services, and even some of the paid service offerings that we offer in each one of those segments. So we do it slightly differently.
And Arjun, for you guys, when you're thinking about segments, is it primarily based on employees, revenue, like the size of the customer, or is it more focused on industry? Like what are the things that make up a segment for you, or how you think about them?
It's the number of users and their sort of the complexity of the deployment, which primarily is driven by a global footprint. So are they, we're located only, we're a 250-person company in 3 locations. Our customers often are in every single continent except from Antarctica. And if there's a U.S. national company, they may need a different level of support than somebody who's actually present in Asia Pacific and in Europe and in Africa. And we need to kind of look at a different staffing model for each of those accounts.
Got it. So I'm going to switch over. We've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, and I think there's a really good natural segue here, which is compensation. So we've talked through the activities, the segments, really aligning around that customer journey. I'd love to understand, and I'm sure the audience would too, based on the questions I'm seeing, how do you comp this team, and how do you think about base versus variable and the number of goals that are laid out for the team? And happy to point this at anyone, but Dave, maybe you can take the first shot at thinking about compensation here.
Yeah, I've been through all models from standard base to simple bonus to variable compensation, and I prefer the variable compensation. And my general rule of thumb is to base it on retention first and then growth. And so, for example, I may design a comp plan with a 75 to 25 base to variable mix in the comp plan, and then within that 25 variable, do the same ratio, 75% on retention and 25% on growth. That way, they are rewarded and motivated to primarily take care of customers and make sure that they retain them, but also get some value in delivering value to their customers and seeing the growth that comes in the account. So that's one way that I like to look at comp plans.
Hey, Dave, I actually have a question on that. So as you think about the growth piece of that, in your experience, have you found that it's both like what I would call like organic growth, like seat growth, just because the customer's company grows, as well as SKU growth, or do you look at just one or the other?
Yeah, usually any kind of growth, just expansion is in general, both cross-sell and upsell. And and even if I've seen some situations, there's a big debate. We could have a whole discussion around comp plans and who owns a renewal and who owns expansion. But generally, my philosophy is I want the CSMs to take an offensive approach to how they versus a defensive approach to how they engage with customers. And if they're meeting their needs and they're really understanding their objectives and driving to their outcomes, you're going to see natural growth and expansion through in different ways. And I want them to drive towards that and be rewarded for that. There is some challenges sometimes if If the model ends up being where you have sales involved in expansion or renewals, or you have a separate team like a renewals team or an expansion team or whatever, there's a lot of different titles. There can be some challenges with the CFO may not like to double comp on those, but I believe that just from my experience again through some challenges with other comp plans, that I like to reward the CSMs for doing their part in helping to drive expansion within the account. They don't need to be sales reps, but if they're meeting the customer's needs, then you tend to naturally see the expansion to come through their efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's generally aligned with what I've seen work as well. But I'm also, one of the things that we're tossing around, I'd be curious if anybody has experience with it, is because product adoption is so critical to our long-term business, we are looking at, should we actually include like non-revenue metrics in comp plans? And it's an open question. We haven't decided yet.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of utilization of off-purchase seats. The only problem is you have to have a bulletproof process where people don't oversell software and expect the CSM to go find all of the use cases and sort of consumers for those seats that have been sold, right? So it works great in a model where there's a clear understanding of how the licenses that have been sold are going to be consumed in a foreseeable time frame. So that's kind of one challenge with that. I mean, I've played around with every possible model. I think we created a new plan for 2017. We're going to redo it for 2018. I think, Stephanie, you told me this once. You said, hey, just do it, and then if it doesn't work, just change it. So that's advice I've taken to heart. I do think that it is important to have a commercial bend on the variable component of the CSM's comp, whether they own renewals or not. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's about driving value, et cetera, but none of it matters if you're not growing the relationship or at least having high retention. Our comp plan right now is base plus variable, 15 to 20% variable depending on sort of the experience of the CSM. And what we do is we base the variable on net revenue retention in their book, so they have an opportunity to influence expansions that can offset sort of unplanned contractions within their customer base. And then we have done spiffs. So spiffs are, inexpensive way to motivate a group of CSMs. We've done spiffs for case studies. We've done spiffs to generate, unplanned bookings within a quarter where the CSM comes and says, hey, look, I went digging this account and I found that they actually are very open to, getting this other team onboarded in the next few, weeks, and we'd be looking at, potentially an opportunity that closes within the quarter. And those are fairly inexpensive and high value for the company. So we've kind of combined variable and spiffs to do that.
Guys, we got a great question from the audience here, really around the process of renewal, and it was mentioned obviously a couple of times, that retention number. But when you think about the actual process of renewing an account, what have you found to be most successful? Who's involved? Is it driven by customer success, by a sales person on the direct side? Like, who really owns and quarterbacks that process, and who else is involved?
So I'll jump in here. I've seen a couple of ways that this has been done, and Box's scale is very different from the previous companies I've worked with, so it's kind of interesting juxtaposition. But typically, well, let me first start by saying that, like everything else in customer success, it depends. It depends on how much negotiation needs to happen at time of renewal. If it's really cut and dried, it's perfectly reasonable for a CSM to take getting that renewal over the line. But if there's going to be, a significant expansion or contraction of that contract, or if there's a negotiation on price or your pricing sheet has changed, et cetera, then that takes a skill set that typically comes from the sales team. And in my experience in previous companies, when the customer success function owned the renewal, we kind of quickly got over our skis, so to speak, when things got a little hairy. And unless you have an agreement lined up with the sales organization ahead of time about who's actually going to run point on the negotiation, it can get really messy, both for you and for the customer. One strategy that I did see work in that model where the CS team was still effectively owning the renewal was we did spin up a renewals desk, a deal desk, that handled both solution sales, so any professional services contracts, as well as the actual renewal transaction. And that became also super important as the company was nearing that stage where you get a lot of auditors coming in, and you get a lot of people looking at your contracts to make sure that everything's buttoned up. So it's sort of as we neared that stage, it got really important to have people who really specialized in that. At Box, we've got a renewals desk that handles 100% of the renewal transactions, and there's this kind of interesting kind of trade that happens between the CSM, the renewals manager, and the sales rep, depending on what needs to happen at time of contract. So if there's a big upsell on the table, then the AE will take the entire transaction. If it's just a straight renewal or a small upsell or small contraction, then the renewals manager will take it. But in no case, at least at Box, is the CSM doing the actual commercial negotiation, even though we do expect them to be sort of up to speed on the commercial aspects of what's going on.
Yeah, completely agree there. I think unfortunately the answer is it depends. I mean, I'll give you my personal example, right? So, ASPs are six-figure deals. We are working with, the largest companies on planet Earth. We're a startup. And guess who we're negotiating the renewal with procurement, right? Like in this model, you need, very high sales acumen to be able to actually get through that renewal discussion because, even though utilization may be high and the economic buyer, the business sponsor is on board, they themselves are coming to us and saying, please help me get this renewal through my own procurement team because these are like large organizations with, with very strict processes that you have to go through. So even with the economic buyer on our side, we need to, sort of wrestle our way through some of these renewals just because of the sheer dollar value of the renewal. So really, it does depend. And, we have tried having our customer success management team on renewals, and we form a strong partnership, but we do need somebody with very high sales acumen leading it, and kind of that's the direction we've moved in now.
So guys, we have a ton more questions from the audience. I'm going to try to feed two more. So first, big topic around hiring, and the question we got was, what non-obvious skills do you look for when hiring? And I'll add to that, I think I've seen a trend of people wanting to bring in more junior team members and developing training programs and advancement and career opportunities, which, look, it can be a great way to scale. It can also be a huge burden on a hiring manager who's having to bring a team up to speed constantly. So I'd love any perspectives on what you're looking for in hiring and kind of how will you hire that onboarding process of your own employees.
Yeah, I can take a pass at it.
Great.
So I would say that this is not like it's becoming increasingly obvious, and especially if you run a customer success team, people are starting to look at this, which is, at the end of the day, what you're looking for from a customer success team is to not be reactive to the customer's asks and respond to them, but to actually be prescriptive, be consultative, and have an opinion. So looking for the same skills that an Accenture or Deloitte or even a professional services team goes and looks when they're doing college recruiting, for example, when you're recruiting analysts straight out of college, where you can train them, you're going to build the playbook for them, but there's sort of this DNA you're looking for in terms of someone who's willing to stand in front of a room and provide guidance if they're enabled properly to be able to do that. That's kind of like a skill that I would say 2 or 3 years ago people weren't looking for as much. I think the focus very much was on relationship building skills and, personality and how quickly you could build rapport with a customer. That was kind of the focus 2 or 3 years ago. But increasingly, if you look at kind of how the CSM practices, the high-performing ones are shaping up, there's a big sort of strong consulting DNA in them. Sorry, Dave.
Oh, that's right. I think for the most part, I'm not looking for domain expertise per se, unless I'm in a business where there's a very high premium on domain expertise, because I can teach a lot of that. I can teach product. I can teach domain. What I'm looking for is I love just a personality that is warm and that people really love to engage with, that has this genuineness and authenticity around it, and this inquisitiveness. I like our CSMs to ask good questions and to really care to know the customers and their objectives, like we've talked about in the past. One interesting thing that I heard recently that somebody has had a lot of success with is hiring people who have been HR professionals in the past that are recruiters in those areas. And they just said that that's been their secret bullet lately to find great CSMs, and so I'm anxious to try that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are two awesome traits. I love the sort of the concept of being consultative as well as that concept of being inquisitive. I think those are critically important. Those are very hard to find and hire for, but they're super important. The other one that is a little less obvious and I think is really important, especially for those on the call who have early stage companies that are kind of hot companies that everybody wants to work for. The one quality that I will never bend on, and this is especially true when I'm hiring for more junior roles, is people have to have had some kind of customer-facing experience. I don't care if it's waiting tables or working retail or being a recruiter or being a camp counselor. I firmly believe that every person self-selects in or out of some sort of customer service type role pretty early in life and early in a career. And if you have, early in life, you're exposed to an opportunity to help somebody else, and you're either drawn to that or you're not. So if you get to, your first or second job out of college and you have not chosen any kind of job that puts you in front of customers, then you don't have a natural affinity for it. And I actually made some mistakes in hiring in early, in some previous roles, where we got people because they were inquisitive and they were consultative and they were super smart and they had the right pedigree and we were growing super fast. But that was the one thing that a couple people did not have, and they didn't make it because they did not have that drive to help other people. And that's something that is really core to what we do in any sort of customer success or customer service role.
Awesome. So guys, unfortunately, I know there's a bunch more questions here. I'm actually going to have to wrap us up on time. But first, huge thank you to our speakers. Thank you so much for making time and for sharing your insights. And then thanks to everyone in the audience for joining and for the great questions. What we're going to do right after this, we'll send out the deck and we'll send out the recording as well. If any additional questions come up, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help facilitate getting those answered for you. And then I'm also going to ask you to keep an eye on our events page. We've got a number of future webinars and speaking opportunities coming up, trying to do at least a quarterly event on this sort of customer success topic. And then with that, I think we'll wrap up. So thank you all for joining today.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Dave.